Of Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's going to be retiring in January.
Yeah, this announcement came as a very big surprise, but it also happened after a major feud with President Trump. Joining us now to talk more about her resignation and other political goings-on are Dr. Lauren Wright. We appreciate your time, Dr. Wright. Thank you as always. Were you surprised when you saw that video on Friday night of Marjorie Taylor Greene retiring?
I wasn't, because her comments in the weeks leading up to it had been so abnormal. I wondered what was going on, and this made perfect sense that she's now free to, she sounded more moderate, to be honest. She's free to step aside, and I think the mistake in the analysis has been, good thing. She's gone. We can get back to this decorum. She's been a really disruptive, relatively extreme member of Congress. But what we know from the history of these types of retirements or people that leave their seat is they're often replaced with someone just as extreme. We call that leapfrog representation in political science, but all it means is she comes from a very specific district that swings very far in the Trump election in every single case, and she's likely to be replaced by someone actually more similar than her in demeanor and politics and voting behavior than not. So we really have to wait and see who comes up.
What's been so interesting with Marjorie Taylor Greene and to some extent with some Republicans and Democrats is that some of them have come together in alliances one would have never suspected before, right? I mean, particularly with the Epstein files and the Affordable Care Act. I've got to tell you what Rep. Eric Swalwell said out of California. I don't know what to make of it. We need her vote to put the Obamacare subsidies back in place because everyone's premiums are going to be going up January 1st. Who would have thought that?
Well, this is another theme of the last couple of weeks, and it applies to Trump having Mamdani in the White House, too, is I think all of us need to take a step back and realize that these really divisive shows of partisanship, these displays with the hatred and the name calling, does not represent how politicians behave behind the scenes. And that's even uglier because these people go to lunch, they work together. If you look at the history of voting behavior in Congress and bipartisan legislation, most of the bills that become law have had bipartisan support since the 70s. And so it's really important for Americans that get really hyped up and really upset about these things, which I completely understand, to do a reality check and realize these people are friends behind the scenes. AOC and Matt Gaetz, for instance, would talk quite often. She worked with Josh Hawley and continues to do so on affordability and tax credits. And so it's really on Americans to say, hold on, am I sort of having the wool pulled over my eyes, or are things really this bad? Because the lawmakers don't behave that badly behind the scenes.
Can I just follow briefly? The fact that what we tend to see and what they showcase for us is so divisive, that comes at a cost, doesn't it? Don't we need to see more bipartisanship?
Totally. I mean, yes. And what's so puzzling about it is when we look at the survey data, Americans support bipartisan legislation. They like to see the parties coming together. They like to see people voting not just along party lines. And so the really ugly incentives, I'll say it again, are electoral. It's so fundraising can get ramped up before elections. It's so members of Congress can get media attention. But then when the cameras turn off, they're backslapping and heading over to the cafeteria and heading over to the monocle and doing things that they do to get things done in Congress. And so, I think it's actually quite irresponsible. And I'm not blaming Americans for thinking that what they see is really as bad as things are. But for members of Congress, yes, they do. It comes at a price. It makes Americans feel more divided than we actually are. And they need to cut out some of that, really, on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I guess the argument that there is a base for politicians, and then there's a Twitter base and a social media base for politicians.
Totally
they have to
true.
play to those.
Yep.
You mentioned messaging. Two masters of messaging met at the White House last week. Zohran Mamdani,
Yeah.
Donald Trump standing side by side like two old friends from New York, smiling at one another. What do you make of the meeting that happened on Friday, and both of them really coming to consensus that, yes, affordability is a problem and we want to get on top of it? But then on Sunday, Mamdani having to answer questions, what do you truly believe about Trump? Do you think he is a fascist? And he said, yeah, I do think he's a fascist.
Unbelievable. I could not take my eyes away from this meeting. And it's two very charismatic, very talented politicians who are very good at relating to the average voter and don't fall in to some of the traditional traps set by journalists to answer questions that might be tricky, might be simple. They both rise above that. They're very, very astute communicators. The trouble is for both of them, they don't need those voters right now. They don't need those base voters that are very, very angry that they met with each other. Perhaps Mamdani has the bigger problem because his voters do believe Trump is a fascist. They've listened to him on those things. And how do you explain going to visit a fascist in the White House, someone you've called these horrific things? I mean, it's either that he was lying in the first place, or he believes we should reach out an olive branch to fascists, which I'm sure his progressive voters would not agree with. But again, it does follow the same theme, Corey, where politicians at the extreme ends of the political spectrum can get together and get things done. And Americans need to watch that and think, hold on, were they putting on a show the rest of the time? Because the answer is yes. The answer is really yes.
Well, really quick, Lauren, I want to ask you, because as you mentioned, Zohran Mamdani getting criticized by folks who voted for him. But at the same time, he'll tell you, look, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. There's nothing I can do about that. If I want New York to succeed, I need help from the federal government. So it's actually in the best interest of my constituents that I am here meeting with Donald Trump.
Well, other politicians have chosen an opposite tact. I mean, Gavin Newsom, yes, he did meet with Trump in the wake of the wildfires, but politicians of the Newsom brand have said, we need to check this guy and resist him at every single turn because he's a danger to democracy. Again, fascism is not a milquetoast claim. That is something that Democrats have been saying. This person is destroying the country. Harris campaigned on the message and Biden campaigned on the message that if he gets elected, the United States as we know it will cease to exist. These are alarmist claims that I don't think were a good idea in the first place. But how do you say those things? I mean, really, voters are owed an explanation. Did you mean it or did you not?
All right, Dr. Lauren Wright, we appreciate the time on a Monday. Happy Thanksgiving.
Anytime.
To you and your family. We'll see you next week.
Anytime for you guys.
Thank
See ya.
you.
Appreciate it.